Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the most heavily praised and intensely loved cartoons in existence, and Netflix has announced its intent to recreate the show into live-action form. Originally, fans were skeptical, but hopeful, as the project had hired the original series creators Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko? Agretsuko. But now the news has come out that both men have left the project over creative differences. Which means there's a job opening and I'm throwing my hat into the ring. Netflix, and anyone else watching, please strap yourselves in for my presentation on how you make a live-action Avatar adaptation. Drumroll, please! No, seriously, you don't. Wait. Don't leave yet. There is a lot more time on this YouTube video, so clearly I have something more to say. Avatar: The Last Airbender should not be made into a live-action adaptation because the idea of a live-action version fails to answer the most important question an adaptation should answer. How does this version improve upon or add to the original? For something like Harry Potter and most book adaptations, the change from books to movies allows for a visual and auditory element to be added to the story, something that could be used to increase the spectacle and overall grandeur, even at the cost of some lost details. While that doesn't make it the best way to experience the story for a lot of fans, few can argue against the idea that, when done properly, they provide something of value the original books cannot. A live-action Avatar remake doesn't seem to have anything to add to the original story to make it unique or better. The medium of animation was perfectly suited to the show's fantasy setting, its creatures, and its action. The show is recent enough that it doesn't look nor sound dated, and the show ran for a pretty perfect number of episodes, enough to really dig into the main plot without too many filler episodes. Overall, most people would consider Avatar to be as close to perfect as we can hope for, given human error. So what can live action provide as a medium that animation can't? I'm sure cinema people are much smarter on this topic than I, and maybe they have the answer, but the only benefit I can see in making something live action is money and convenience. And maybe a more adult feel to the story. So already Netflix has put itself in a losing position where they have to somehow wow an audience when that audience is comparing whatever they put out to an almost perfect TV show. But I have a plan. It's crazy, it has no guarantee of working, but if you're set on this live-action adaptation thing, then you're already betting on crazy and unlikely to work. First, we have to define what an adaptation is and how that influences what we can do with the story. My parameters are as follows. 1. The story and characters must come from Avatar: The Last Airbender, as it is an adaptation and not an alternate story set in the same universe. 2. It must remain live action for a vast majority of the runtime. 3. I'm not going to worry terribly about the budget, but I will be keeping the show within the realm of possibility for a TV production. Number 4, I'm also going to assume that everyone Netflix theoretically hires is actually good at their job, so that cuts out things like no bad lighting, no bad acting, and not showing a Starbucks cup in your medieval fantasy show. Lastly, I must keep the show fit for a Netflix TV runtime, that being about 6 to 12 45-minute episodes in one season, with the possibility of more if successful. So where do we start? Well, we actually start at our greatest resource, the first attempt at a live-action Avatar adaptation. That's right, we have to drudge up the memory of Shyamalan's movie. I don't have time to get into detail about why this movie was bad. There are plenty of videos about that on YouTube. Instead, we're going to focus on key failures the Shyamalan movie made that we can correct and account for. The easiest is bending. We already know bending is integral to the show's identity, and the movie's terrible handling of it only proves that we have to keep bending as close to the original as possible, while also getting a bit creative with it. Of course, since most bending will be in CGI, we'll have to keep in mind our TV budget. So we'll keep a majority of bending on a smaller scale, but when it gets to cool climaxes and important fights, we go all out. The second thing we can learn from the Shyamalan mishap is the importance of culture in the show. Obviously, the 4 nations are based on 4 real-life groups: the Inuit, the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Tibetan peoples. This should be respected in casting choices and built upon even more. It should be reflected in the world, in the music, and in the action. The last major thing we can learn from the Shyamalan movies is that Avatar needs a sense of humor. Nothing too adult and nothing too childish. Just a wholesome and relatable sense of humor to carry us through the darker moments and themes. Actually, there is one more thing that the Shyamalan movie can teach us. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a lot of story, and it isn't going to fit in one season. Even cutting down the story to only book 1, there's approximately 400 minutes in the original series versus what the movie had at 103. Now, if we're at our shortest season of 6 episodes, we would get 270 minutes. But if we were given the max of 12 episodes, we would get 540, which is much more manageable, but leads me to my next point. Do we just retell the exact same story? We could have the time, and we could theoretically just copy the script. So just copy the original and we'd have an instant classic, right? Wrong. There was no point in just copying the original because we already have the original. Like I said before, an adaptation needs to provide something different so that it stands on its own beside the original. So this is where the crazy part of the plan comes into play. I want to change the plot. Just a bit. You ever heard of a little movie called How to Train Your Dragon? It's okay if you haven't. It's only a DreamWorks mega hit that spawned a trilogy, several TV series, and one of the most recognizable dragons in cinema history. Also, it's my favorite movie, but that matters only slightly less. The important part is that you know that How to Train Your Dragon was first a 12-part book series. Yeah, I know. Strangely, not a lot of people know that part. I bring up this adaptation in particular because it is an incredibly loved movie that shares very little with its book counterpart. In the books, Toothless is the tiniest dragon, can speak a language called Dragonese, misbehaves all the time, but ultimately is the first dragon to not have a selfish thought. That is very different from the Toothless we got. Almost everything in that book is different, and yet both are considered good and have their own strengths and weaknesses while being, in essence, the same story about Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III overcoming prejudice to become a hero. I want to do the same with Avatar. I want to tell the same story in essence, but change it so that it is entirely its own story. We keep the essential building blocks and the essential characters, but everything else is free game to change. So who are my essential characters? Well, my essential characters are Aang, Sokka, Katara, Toph, Zuko, Iroh, and Azula. Now that's not to say that everyone else needs to change, only that if the story calls for it, we can take some more liberties while trying to hold true to what those characters stood for. Oh, and Netflix, that doesn't mean adding sex and gore so that Avatar can be a discount Game of Thrones. Adding sex doesn't make a show adult or better, it just means people can jerk off to characters that were originally 14 with a little less guilt on their conscience. Avatar wasn't a gritty war story, it was a story about the consequences of war and one kid's journey in fulfilling his responsibility as one gifted with great strength. That's what we need to capitalize on. So how do we change the story enough so that it's different while keeping it close enough to share the same lessons and themes from the original? Well, here's my attempt. 100 years ago, the Fire Nation under Fire Lord Sozin set out on a military campaign to conquer the other 3 nations and unify them under the Fire Lord's rule. Sozin was a phenomenal strategist, and a brilliant plan was formed to take out his one perceived obstacle, the new Avatar. He would be an air nomad now, and he would still be too young to master any of the 4 elements other than air. So with a decisive attack, the Fire Nation targeted all 3 Air Nation temples and burned them and their people to the ground. But he never did find the Avatar, and he remained paranoid about his return until his inevitable death. During those 100 years, his son Firelord Azulon and his grandson Firelord Ozai would continue his work, launching campaign after campaign until they had taken over both the Water Tribes and the Earth Kingdom. Now, the world is in disarray as the Fire Nation makes its last plan of attack to ensure its rule for years to come. That is, until young Water Tribe members Sokka and Katara find something incredible, a boy and a creature long thought extinct, trapped in ice. They break him out, but realize very quickly that they must hide him before their Fire Nation captors see him. They hide him in a nearby ice cave, where they come to visit him and bring him supplies. In their talks, he explains that he is an air nomad named Aang, and he seems to know nothing of the current world. He also tries to airbend, but nothing happens. Katara and Sokka go home and try to think of what to do with the strange kid from the ice and his pet. Aang leaves the cave against their wishes and wanders, questioning why his bending won't work and plagued with confusion as to his current circumstances. As he thinks to himself, he ends up overlooking the Southern Water Tribe just in time to see a confrontation. One of the Fire Nation generals in charge of the Southern Water Tribe has picked a fight with Gran Gran, and neither Katara nor Sokka can stand by and watch. Katara tries to waterbend, but not only is it difficult for her with no training, it is also illegal to bend under Fire Nation rule. A task force quickly responds, taking Katara away into a Fire Nation vessel. Aang joins Sokka and Gran Gran, where he learns that the Fire Nation are going to take her away somewhere where she'll never return. Aang agrees to go with Sokka to save her before they can leave, even without his bending. They sneak on the boat and search for Katara, hiding from any soldiers that pass by. Eventually, they find her and break her out, but the boat starts to move. They almost make it out, but are spotted and have to run. Ultimately, they are cornered on the bow of the ship, and when all hope seems lost, a memory resurfaces, and Aang sees Monk Gyatso. His master gives him words of encouragement, reminding him that he has a responsibility as both the Avatar and as a human being to protect those who cannot protect themselves. With this memory, Aang gathers his courage to fight and regains his airbending abilities. He blasts everyone away, and everyone escapes on Appa. As he leaves, one of the soldiers on board removes his helmet, revealing himself to be none other than Zuko, astonished that the missing nomad has finally been found. As they escape, Katara and Sokka marvel that Aang was telling the truth, and he is an air nomad. They question if he knows the missing Avatar, and Aang reluctantly replies that he does, and it is him. So here's what differs in this telling through the rest of the story. 1. They'll all be just a little bit older, like upper teens instead of lower, just so that the production isn't relying on a 12-year-old child actor to carry the entire show. 2. The Fire Nation already has a foothold in every nation. They have already won the war at this point. This means that some stories will change from repelling a Fire Nation attack to removing the Fire Nation from an area. For example, the Kyoshi warriors would now be a fighting group that at night sabotages the Fire Nation presence on their island, while during the day they wear the guise of helpless ladies. Same characters kicking butt, just under different circumstances. Number 3. Because of this change, the goal is not about mastering all 4 elements as fast as possible to stop the invasion. The invasion has already happened. Now the goal is to start a rebellion to fight back against the Fire Nation. Aang and friends decide to travel to the Northern Water Tribe first because that is where Hakoda and the other fighters of the Southern Water Tribe went to start a rebellion of their own. After they meet up, the goal will be for Aang and his friends to be a small party that causes minor disturbances and raises the hopes for the people while distracting from Hakoda and the others' plan for a great uprising. Number 4. Zuko functions pretty similarly at first. He is still dishonored and still hunts after the Avatar, but in this version it is entirely self-driven. Ozai has no desire for his son to return to the Fire Nation after his display of weakness, and has set him to work under another general in the Southern Water Tribe as a way of exiling Zuko. Zuko no longer holds any power as a prince, and only Iroh values him. After seeing Aang airbend, Zuko determines he must be the Avatar, and knowing the desperation to find the missing Avatar that has plagued his family for years, convinces himself that capturing the Avatar will give him his father's respect. He and Iroh will sneak away from their post to follow the Avatar. Over time, Zuko will go through the same growth, realizing the error of the Fire Nation's ways, just like in the original, but in this version, he won't ever make it back to the Fire Nation as a prince, until his father is defeated, because Ozai will never acknowledge him as his son. Number 5. The story will focus on guerrilla tactics, ways for the everyday people to wage war and protect themselves versus this heavily trained army. Instead of people worried about the war reaching them, this will be a story about people that have lost, but refuse to accept defeat forever, and a slow building hope that this bleak future they've been promised can be avoided. Number 6. Aang will still be reluctant and a bit childish as everyone wants to force him to be the face of this rebellion when he doesn't want to bear that responsibility. He didn't ask to be the Avatar. This is his internal conflict for the first season, and what causes his initial inability to airbend. Number 7. Aang will master the other elements, but in order to save some time and fit better with the secretive nature of the story, Aang will initially learn the elements from his past lives. This will be done in moments where Aang has character growth. As he becomes more ready to be the Avatar and accept the responsibility that comes with it, his past lives will meet him and give him the basics needed to harness their element of origin. He won't get their mastery of the art, so he will still grow and learn from others, but I think this can be a fun change that can make for some cool moments. It would echo the unlocking of Chi Aang experienced in the original series, bringing the idea back as part of his entire bending journey instead of just the Avatar state. I'd especially like if these moments were done in animation, as a nod to the series' past life. Number 8. In order to save on CGI, we're gonna have more emphasis on the martial arts styles as part of the fighting. Not as boring forms done before bending like in the Shyamalan film, but like a traditional martial arts film. Have battles between benders and swordsmen, swordsmen and swordsmen, non-benders and other non-benders. I'd also like to dive more into Japanese culture and have some Fire Nation soldiers more akin to ninjas and some like samurai than traditional soldiers. Same can be done with the rest of the nations. Bring in a diverse history of fighting styles and tactics. Number 9. No Great Divide. We don't need it. With these changes, I believe that the characters and lessons that made the original so great can still work, just in new ways that provide a slightly different look at them. The first season will end at the North Pole just like the original, and leave with the start of the formal rebellion, where the story can continue if given the green light, but isn't a cliffhanger if the series ends there. A potential second season would revolve around the reclamation of the Earth Kingdom, and the final season would be the overthrowing of Ozai to place Zuko on the throne, before Sozin's Comet allows the Fire Nation to completely destroy the other nations, keeping a very similar pacing to the original, but with slightly differing goals. So will this make the perfect Avatar adaptation? Honestly, no. While I'd be interested in watching this version, I can't think how this would be better than the original. It would just be different. But maybe a good different? Like I said, this project is pretty much doomed from the start, so the best Netflix can hope for is to make something that is at least enjoyable and non-insulting to the fan base. They need to really go hard on creativity if any of this is gonna work. So that's my recommendation. Go 110% or don't try at all. Make big bold steps away from the original or leave the property as it is. That's it. Thank you so much for watching Feel free to leave your Avatar remake ideas in the comments section below, or let me know how you feel about my random adaptation that I made up. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye! Hi there, it's the end of the video, my friend. Hit the bell if it was okay, I'm sure I'll make good content someday. I'll play some games or do some drawing, Pokemon and fights with darling, video essays and reviews. I couldn't do it without you, so thanks, like and subscribe.